today's stories, we follow what happens when people who watched one YouTube video try to conquer Everest. From unclipping safety gear to demonstrate a technique they saw online, to arguing that posting sponsored content was more important than survival at 26,000 feet. The decisions they made next horrified and left even veteran Sherpas haunted. It was April 23, 2016, and Everest Base Camp at 17,600 feet was entering the final phase before the spring summit window. Prayer flags snapped above tent clusters, sprawled across the Khumbu Glacier, and temperatures hovered near 20 degrees Fahrenheit in early morning. Among the teams preparing were Rebecca Holloway, 47, from Dallas, and Jennifer Caldwell, 45, from Austin. Friends who had met through a fitness studio and decided Everest would be their ultimate achievement after watching a viral summit video that made the climb look like a guided hike with a view. Rebecca ran a marketing consultancy. Jennifer maintained a lifestyle blog with 78,000 followers. Neither had climbed above Kilimanjaro. They paid $68,000 each to a mid-tier Nepali operator. Their Sherpa was Temba Rigzan, 41, from Kumjung, 11 Everest summits, known for patience with inexperienced climbers but uncompromising on safety. His income supported his wife, 3 children, and his sister's family. The $8,500 fee for guiding both women represented nearly half his annual earnings. The problems began during the first icefall crossing when Rebecca and Jennifer treated the route as a content opportunity. They stopped repeatedly for coordinated photos at ladder crossings, asked Temba to film video clips, and insisted on retakes when lighting did not meet their standards. What should have been a 4-hour crossing stretched to nearly 6 as other teams passed and the sun warmed the glacier into instability. Temba explained that time in the icefall directly correlated to exposure beneath shifting seracs. Rebecca responded that their sponsors expected quality content. The behavior continued through rotations. At Camp 2, they spent 90 minutes staging photos with the Lhotse face in the background. At Camp 3, Jennifer filmed a monologue about mental toughness despite visible exhaustion. When Temba checked their oxygen saturation at 23,500 feet and found Rebecca at 71% and Jennifer at 69%, he recommended immediate descent. Both dismissed the suggestion, citing YouTube videos of climbers who had continued with similar numbers. The summit push departed Camp 4 at 11 p.m. on May 18th. They climbed slowly but steadily through the first hours. Above the balcony at 27,600 feet, the rest stops lengthened and breathing became labored. Around dawn, with the summit 1,200 feet above, the weather shifted. Cloud built from the southwest and wind increased to 30-mile-per-hour gusts. Temba told Rebecca and Jennifer they needed to descend immediately. Rebecca pointed at the visible summit and said they were too close to turn back. Jennifer agreed, stating they had promised their followers a summit. By 10:30 a.m., at 28,400 feet, visibility collapsed into a whiteout driven by 40-mile-per-hour gusts. Temba stopped and told both women they were turning around immediately. They resisted, insisting on pausing for conditions to clear. With all 3 clipped to the fixed line, Temba began clearing a buried section of rope at a transition point, a task requiring both hands in near-zero visibility. The work took less than a minute. When Temba looked up, both women had unclipped from the line. He could not see their headlamps. In whiteout conditions at 28,400 feet, a few meters off the packed track was enough to erase all visual reference. No contrast, no horizon, no depth. He searched for 35 minutes, following tracks that showed movement, downslope and off-route, before losing them in drifting snow. Then he returned to the fixed line and descended to Camp 4, arriving severely hypothermic. Rebecca Holloway and Jennifer Caldwell were found the following morning, approximately 200 feet off-route at 28,300 feet. Both had frozen to death. Their cameras contained footage filmed at 28,400 feet, showing them discussing how close they were to the summit. Temba participated in the recovery despite severe frostbite on 3 fingers. Surgeons amputated the distal portions of his index, middle, and ring fingers. The loss reduced his grip strength enough that technical ice climbing became dangerous. He retired from high-altitude work at 43. It was May 12, 2016, and the western CWM stretched for miles between base camp and the Lhotse face, a broad glacial valley that became a solar oven by mid-morning. Temperatures started near 10 degrees Fahrenheit and climbed past 40 in direct sun, accelerating dehydration at 20,000 feet. Patrick Morgan, 52, from Boston, had spent 26 years as a corporate attorney before retiring to pursue deferred life experiences. He approached Everest with methodical preparation, personal trainer, expedition accounts, contingency plans, and hundreds of hours of online research he treated as equivalent to field experience. His climbing experience consisted of Rainier and Aconcagua. He paid $71,000 to a well-regarded Western operator. His Sherpa was Norden Furba, 38, from Pangboche, 9 Everest summits, respected for reading weather and managing clients who confused determination with capability. He supported his wife, 2 children, and his brother's widow and her children. Patrick's defining characteristic was legalistic thinking. He treated protocols as contractual obligations. During the first briefing, when expedition leader Robert Kelvin explained the summit attempts could be canceled based on weather or client condition, Patrick asked what metrics would trigger that decision and whether it could be appealed. Kelvin explained that guiding required judgment that could not be reduced to checklists. Patrick responded that his $71,000 payment contractually entitled him to a summit attempt barring extraordinary circumstances. Through rotations, the pattern intensified. When Norden recommended an extra rest day at Camp 2 because his saturation read 73%, Patrick argued the measurement fell within acceptable parameters based on ranges he had found in online climbing forums, and that delaying without medical necessity violated the expedition's duty. When Kelvin supported Norden's recommendation, Patrick complied, but made clear he considered it overly conservative. The critical failure occurred during the final rotation to Camp 3. Patrick developed a persistent headache and nausea at 21,000 feet. Norden recognized inadequate acclimatization and recommended immediate descent. Patrick refused, citing the timeline and pointing out others with similar symptoms had continued. He produced printed pages from a medical journal discussing difficulty distinguishing altitude sickness from dehydration. Norden explained his assessment came from 16 years of watching clients deteriorate. Patrick dismissed this as anecdotal evidence. He climbed to Camp 3 against explicit recommendation. By 23,500 feet, he fumbled simple tasks and moved with unsteady gait, signaling cerebral edema. Norden checked his saturation, 68%. He told Patrick he needed immediate descent or risked cerebral swelling, progressing to coma within hours. Patrick insisted he would rest overnight and reassess. The following morning, Patrick was found unresponsive in his tent. The cerebral edema had progressed overnight until consciousness became impossible. Norden and 2 Sherpas began emergency descent, carrying and lowering him through technical Lhotse face terrain. Patrick Morgan died during descent at approximately 22,800 feet. Norden sustained severe lower back injury during evacuation. Hauling dead weight down 45-degree ice hyperextended his spine and herniated 2 discs. Surgery provided partial relief, but chronic pain ended his ability to work above Camp 2. He retired from expedition work at 39. It was April 29, 2017, and Camp 2 at 21,200 feet sat in the western CWM's heart. Surrounded by towering walls that compressed sound and reflected afternoon heat, Linda Hartwell, 49, from Phoenix, had built a successful real estate company before selling to fund personal reinvention. She maintained social media presence across platforms for 92,000 combined followers. Her Everest expedition was the centerpiece of her content strategy, partially funded by $38,000 in gear sponsorships requiring branded posts from each camp. Her experience consisted of Kilimanjaro and a failed Denali attempt, but she had watched shared dozens of Everest vlogs from other influencers who summited, and the footage made the climb look difficult but manageable for anyone willing to pay and push through. Her Sherpa was Kusang Bote, 44, from Namche, 13 Everest summits, known for tolerating difficult clients because he understood economic reality. The fee represented money his family depended on. Linda's behavior centered on content creation at survival's expense. She spent hours filming multiple takes when she should have been resting. At Camp 1, she asked Kusang to film her crossing an icefall ladder 3 times for the right angle. At Camp 2, she refused expedition meals, insisting Kusang prepare specific foods she brought, leaving both with less rest. At Camp 3, Linda spent 30 minutes on appearance prep before filming a segment about mental toughness, time she did not have at 23,500 feet, where every calorie and every minute of rest carried survival value. When Kusang checked her saturation at 70%, he recommended skipping video work for hydration and rest. Linda responded that sponsors expected content and she had contractual obligations. By Camp 4 on May 14th, Linda had depleted reserves she never possessed. At 26,000 feet, she asked Kusang whether the expedition's satellite phone could be used to upload video to meet sponsorship deadlines. Kusang explained the phone was reserved for emergencies and weather updates. Her saturation at Camp 4 measured 71%, despite supplemental oxygen, suggesting her body was absorbing oxygen poorly. Kusang told expedition leader Dawa Tashi that Linda was not physically prepared. Dawa spoke with Linda, who insisted she felt strong. Dawa noted the saturation was borderline and told Linda the decision was hers, but that Kusang's 13 seasons of experience should be weighed seriously. Linda stated she was continuing. They departed at 11 p.m. Linda's pace was slow from the start. 20 steps, 2-minute rests, labored breathing. By the balcony at 4 a.m., she stopped every 15 steps with 5-minute rests. Kusang checked saturation, 58%. He told her directly that her body was shutting down and they needed immediate descent. Linda refused. She had promised followers a summit. She had sponsors expecting branded photos. She had invested too much to turn around. At 27,800 feet, Linda sat down and stopped. She told Kusang she needed 5 minutes. He tried repeatedly to get her moving, adjusting oxygen, offering water, speaking with urgency about descending before she lost ability to walk. Her responses became incoherent. Her eyes stopped focusing. Exhaustion and hypoxia pushed her past where consciousness could sustain effort. She slumped forward. Kusang tried to stand her, but her legs would not support weight. Linda Hartwell died at 27,800 feet around 6:30 a.m. Kusang remained with her nearly 3 hours before accepting she was gone and descending. The extended time at extreme altitude triggered pulmonary edema in Kusang's lungs. He reached Camp 4 in critical condition and was evacuated to Kathmandu, where doctors diagnosed permanent lung scarring. The damage reduced his capacity enough that working above 20,000 feet became medically inadvisable. Kusang's high-altitude career ended at 44. It was May 7, 2016, and the approach to Camp 2 cut across the western CWMs. The route followed wands and tracks across snow bridges, spanning crevasses deep enough to swallow climbers completely. Mark Crawford, 47, and his wife, Diane, 45, were both from Atlanta. Mark worked as a pharmaceutical sales director. Diane ran an operations consulting firm. Their experience consisted of Kilimanjaro together and an incomplete Elbrus attempt that ended early for work obligations. The Everest idea came from a YouTube documentary they watched on a flight. A polished video that showed summit day in golden light and said almost nothing about the weeks of suffering that made it possible. Their Sherpa was Mingma Jongbu, 36, from Kumjung. 7 Everest summits, respected for technical skill and situational awareness. The Crawfords' defining behavior was mutual reinforcement. Individually, either might have listened to reason. Together, every recommendation became something to negotiate. Every protocol a timeline obstacle, and any hesitation from one was quickly overridden by the other's confidence. During initial briefing, When expedition leader Furba Tashi explained standard rotation schedules, Mark asked whether timelines could be compressed for climbers in excellent condition. Furba explained acclimatization occurred at rates bodies controlled, not schedules. Diane responded that they had limited vacation time and expected efficiency. Mark nodded. The united front they presented in boardrooms now aimed at 29,000 feet. When Mingma recommended an extra rest day at Camp 2 because Diane's saturation read 72%, Mark pointed out his own reading was 76 and argued the difference proved individual variation, not inadequate acclimatization. Diane, unwilling to appear weaker than her husband, dismissed Mingma's concern and insisted they continue on the original schedule. The critical mistake began at Camp 2 during the final rotation, when Mark developed a persistent cough, dry at first, then producing clear fluid. Mingma recognized the progression immediately and recommended descent for both. Mark refused, attributing the cough to dry air and citing a climbing forum post that described identical symptoms as routine above 20,000 feet. Diane backed his assessment, adding she had experienced similar symptoms on Elbrus without issue. Mingma escalated to Furba, who examined Mark and heard subtle crackling, indicating early pulmonary edema. Furba recommended descent. Diane asked whether she could continue alone. Furba said the recommendation applied to Mark, but strongly suggested Diane also rest given her own numbers. Mark, unwilling to watch his wife continue without him, refused, stating the decision was his according to the liability waivers. The climb to Camp 3 on May 9th revealed how badly Mark's body was failing. The cough worsened, and fluid turned faintly pink, blood-tinged sputum confirming fluid leaking into lung tissue. By 23,500 feet, Mark stopped every 30 steps, his breathing a wet rattle audible to passing climbers. Diane moved more steadily, but had developed a persistent headache that worsened with altitude, and her coordination had begun slipping, fumbled carabiner clips, and misjudged distances reaching for the fixed rope. Neither acknowledged the other's deterioration. Mingma told them repeatedly they both needed immediate descent. Mark insisted he would rest at Camp 3 and reassess. That night, the mountain collected on both deaths simultaneously. Mark's breathing deteriorated into gurgling as his lungs filled faster than his body could clear. A climber in a neighboring tent heard the labored breathing around midnight and checked on them. Diane, glassy-eyed and sluggish, waved the climber away and insisted Mark was fine. The climber reported the interaction to Mingma, who went to the tent and urged immediate descent. By morning, neither responded. Mark's lips were blue, his chest producing drowning sounds, because that was exactly what was happening, his lungs filling from inside. Diane lay beside him, the cerebral edema that had started as a headache having swelled past the point where consciousness could hold. Mingma and two Sherpas found them at dawn. Mark Crawford died in his tent at Camp 3 around daybreak on May 10th. Diane Crawford died during emergency descent at approximately 22,600 feet. Mingma and the two Sherpas had to secure Mark's body before they could begin moving Diane. By the time they started lowering her down the Lhotse face, the window that might have saved her had already closed. During lowering, Mingma bore majority weight through a belay system on steep, 45-degree ice. By Camp 2, his rotator cuff had torn completely. Surgery repaired the tear, but the shoulder never recovered full strength. Mingma could no longer safely manage loads high-altitude guiding required. He retired at 37 and took a job managing a trekking shop in Namche. It was May 18, 2017, and Camp 4 at 26,000 feet clung to a wind-swept col where tents fought constant gusts and thin air turned simple tasks into exhausting efforts. Sandra Whitfield, 50 from Seattle, had spent 6 months preparing by consuming every piece of online content she could find. She had watched hundreds of summit videos, read dozens of blog posts, and participated in forums where amateurs shared advice with the confidence of people who had never been above 20,000 feet. Her actual experience consisted of Rainier, Kilimanjaro, and one unsuccessful Aconcagua attempt ending at high camp. Her Sherpa was Chetan Dorje, 42, from Tame, 10 Everest summits, known for patience with inexperienced clients and explaining technical concepts clearly. Sandra's defining behavior was constant correction based on YouTube videos. She questioned Chetan's rope management, pacing, oxygen flow, and weather assessment. At Camp 2, she told Chetan his clipping method was inefficient compared to a sport climbing video. Chetan explained the method was designed for rock routes and gym walls, light gloves, full cognitive function, visible handholds. High altitude work required simpler, redundant systems because cold and hypoxia made fine motor tasks unreliable. Sandra dismissed this as resistance to innovation. The critical issue emerged around oxygen management. At Camp 4, Chetan set Sandra's regulator to 4 liters per minute. Sandra immediately reduced flow to 2 liters, explaining a video said experienced climbers conserved oxygen by running minimal rates. Chetan reset the regulator and explained inadequate flow in the death zone would cause rapid cognitive decline, that the climbers in those videos were highly acclimatized veterans, and their physiology bore no resemblance to hers. They departed at 11 p.m. Sandra climbed steadily for 2 hours, but above 27,000 feet, her pace deteriorated in ways oxygen should have prevented. Chetan checked her regulator and found she had reduced flow to 1 liter, barely enough to sustain consciousness. He reset it to 4 liters and told her directly that reducing oxygen was killing her. Sandra insisted she was following expert advice. Above 28,000 feet, hypoxia overwhelmed her. Sandra's cognitive function declined until she could no longer distinguish between Chetan's protocols and the video techniques she had memorized at sea level. At a transition point where the fixed rope changed anchors, she attempted a clipping method from a sport climbing tutorial, unclipping both tethers simultaneously before reclipping, a movement suicidal on a 40-degree ice slope at 28,200 feet in darkness. Chetan was 3 feet behind her on the rope. He saw her hands move to both carabiners and shouted for her to stop. Sandra either did not hear or did not process the instruction. For 3 seconds, she stood free on exposed ice with nothing securing her. Her crampon slipped. She fell. The fall carried her approximately 400 feet down steep terrain before impact with rock stopped movement. Chetan descended immediately but knew from the angle and distance that survival was impossible. He found Sandra's body wedged against an outcrop. She had died on impact. Expedition leaders determined her body created a route hazard, and insurance pressured the company into recovery. Chetan volunteered, descending off route across steep, ice-glazed rock. During approach, his crampon scraped across verglas without catching. He fell 20 feet before arresting, but impact fractured his left ankle and opened a deep laceration across his calf. The injury made climbing impossible. Other Sherpas completed recovery while Chetan was evacuated to Kathmandu. The ankle required surgery, but infection set in during the days between injury and treatment. Despite antibiotics, infection spread to bone tissue and forced partial amputation of his left foot, ending any possibility of technical climbing or high-altitude work. Chetan retired from guiding at 42, not because he wanted to, but because a client who had watched YouTube videos believed she knew more than someone who had summited Everest 10 times. He returned to Tame and took work maintaining trekking trails, a job that kept him in the mountains, but reminded him daily of what following bad advice had cost. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.